My mom passed away about 6 months ago after a long battle with cancer. She was my rock, and we had an incredibly close bond. Losing her was devastating. I'm 19, and up until recently, I had been living with my dad, who, until this happened, was my other rock, my source of stability. My parents' marriage wasn't perfect, but it was functional enough that I thought they were happy. Losing my mom made our little family seem so much smaller, and for a while, it was just dad and me, figuring out life. Then, 3 months after mom's death, my dad dropped a bombshell. He was getting remarried. I was stunned. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. To me, it seemed like he was rushing things. I mean, just a few months ago, we were grieving together, and now he was ready to move on? He claimed that this woman, let's call her Jane, had been an old friend, someone he had reconnected with shortly after mom got sick. I wanted to be open-minded. I understood that everyone grieves differently, and maybe this was his way of coping. But deep down, it felt wrong. It felt like he was disrespecting my mom's memory by jumping into a new relationship so quickly. When I tried to express this to him, he launched into a speech about how he deserved to be happy after everything he had been through. I felt my heart sink. I didn't want to start a fight, so I kept quiet. I was trying to be mature, to avoid conflict, but inside, I was a complete wreck. It was so hard to watch him move on while I was still processing my own grief. It felt like he had replaced my mom with someone new, and I didn't know how to deal with those feelings. Jane moved in almost immediately, along with her daughter, Emily, who was 17. I didn't know much about Emily, but I could see how close she and her mom were. They seemed to have this bond that I felt completely left out of. Jane was always pleasant, smiling and trying to be friendly, but I could sense she was trying to assert her dominance over the household in subtle ways. Suddenly, there were new house rules, changes to our routines, and shifts in how everything worked. The familiar comfort of home was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable atmosphere that made me feel like a stranger in my own space. At first, I tried to go with the flow, thinking maybe this was just part of adjusting to the new living arrangements. But the more I watched Jane and Emily settle in, the more alienated I felt. They had their own little world, and I was just an outsider looking in. It was hard to adjust to the fact that my dad had chosen to prioritize their needs over mine, especially when I was still reeling from losing my mom. Then the real bombshell dropped. One day, out of the blue, Dad sat me down for a serious talk. I could tell by his expression that this wasn't going to be good. He told me that since Emily was moving in, he thought it would be best if I considered moving out to make space for her. I was in disbelief. He actually suggested that I gift my room to Emily because she needed it more. He told me I could stay at my uncle's place temporarily while they adjusted to the new living arrangements. I wanted to scream and shout, but I remembered how my dad reacted the last time when I shared my thoughts on his marriage. So, I stayed calm, on the outside at least. I chose not to argue or get emotional and simply said okay. I packed my bags, called my uncle, and moved out. My uncle welcomed me with open arms. He was as shocked as I was when I told him what happened. It was only when I left that the reality of the situation hit me. My dad had chosen his new wife and stepdaughter over me, his own child, only months after my mom had passed away. The betrayal stung deeply. For a few days, I didn't hear from Dad. I assumed he was relieved that I had left without putting up a fight. It seemed like Dad didn't care enough to reach out, and I figured he was happy to have me out of the house. After all, he got what he wanted, right? Emily got my room, Jane got her new life with Dad, and I was out of the way. I remember sitting in my uncle's guest room, staring at my phone, half expecting some sort of apology or explanation. But there was nothing. It stung more than I expected, like I'd been completely erased from his life. I kept telling myself I did the right thing by leaving and trying to focus on getting settled at my uncle's place and keeping up with my college assignments. Then, out of nowhere, the silence broke. One day, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts from Dad. At first, I ignored them, assuming it was more of the same adjusting talk he'd given me before. But then it became relentless, one missed call after another, message after message. He was apologizing, asking me to come home, saying things could go back to normal. His tone had completely changed from when I left, and I started to get suspicious. Why this sudden desperation? I didn't respond at first, but the sheer volume of messages made me curious. Why was he so eager to get me back now? What had changed? Finally, I caved and texted him back, asking what was going on. That's when he told me about the letter. He tried to downplay it, but the more he talked, the more I realized something significant had happened. He mentioned receiving an official letter from my mom's estate attorney, which didn't make much sense to me at first. I knew my mom had a will. She had mentioned it in passing when she was sick, but I hadn't thought much about the details. Apparently, this letter was a big deal. My dad explained, in a roundabout way, that my mom's will had been finalized, and according to the will, my mom had left her share of the house to me. That means my dad and I are now co-owners of the house, me owning half, and him the other half. So, while dad still has his share, he can't sell the house or make any major changes to it without my consent. I guess I had assumed everything would go to dad, given that they were married. But she had made sure I was taken care of, and it hit me hard just how much thought she had put into it. Even though I wasn't 21 yet, being 19 meant I had a legal stake in the house. I hadn't realized how significant that was until dad started explaining that he couldn't make any major decisions about the property without my consent. This news completely shifted the dynamic. Now that dad and Jane know they need me to stay in control of the house, they've been spamming me with calls and texts nonstop. It's not just them either, they've roped in the rest of the family. I'm getting messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all saying I need to be the bigger person and go back home for the sake of family harmony. It's overwhelming. I'm a full-time college student, and I already have so much on my plate with classes, assignments, and trying to balance a part-time job. The worst part is how Jane has started messaging me too, acting all nice and trying to guilt me into returning. She's offered to let me share the room with Emily now, as if that's supposed to make up for everything. It feels so disingenuous, like they're just trying to smooth things over because they realize they've lost control of the situation. They didn't care about my feelings until they realized they needed me, and now they're trying to act like we're all one big happy family. Frankly, it's a lot to deal with. I didn't ask for any of this, and all I really wanted was some time to grieve and process everything after losing my mom. I'm stuck in this mess, feeling like I have to fight just to hold on to what my mom wanted me to have. Now, I don't know what to do. The house is legally half mine, but I'm not sure if I want to go back. Update 1. Hi guys, first of all, thank you so much for all the support and advice in the comments. Reading through your personal experiences has honestly been one of the few things keeping me sane these past few days. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in dealing with complicated family stuff. For those asking, my uncle, let's call him Uncle James, is my mom's brother, not my dad's. He's been nothing but supportive, and I'm lucky to have him as a place to stay while I sort all this out. So, there's been another development. While my dad's side of the family has been nonstop in their attempts to get me to come back, something interesting happened that I didn't see coming. My mom's lawyer paid me a visit to Uncle James's house. I wasn't expecting it, and honestly, it kind of caught me off guard. I had only met the lawyer once before, at the reading of my mom's will, but I didn't really think I'd be hearing from him again, at least not anytime soon. When he showed up, my first thought was that something had gone wrong with the house or my legal rights over it, but it turned out to be something completely different. Apparently, my mom had set up a small trust fund for me, and the lawyer was there to explain the details. My uncle, James, is the trustee, which means he's in charge of managing the trust until I'm old enough to handle it on my own. The trust isn't anything huge, just a small amount of money that my mom had set aside for emergencies or for my future needs. I guess she wanted to make sure I had something to fall back on, even if things got complicated with dad and the house. The thing is, I'm not sure if my dad even knows about this trust. Mom must have set it up quietly, and since Uncle James is the trustee, it's possible dad wasn't aware of it at all. That realization made me feel even more protected by my mom. It's like she had planned for every possibility, even the ones I never imagined. The trust fund isn't a game changer in terms of my financial situation, but it's comforting to know that I have some extra security, especially with everything that's happening right now. I haven't told my dad about the trust, and honestly, I'm not sure if I should. He's been blowing up my phone with messages, and I've had calls from all sorts of relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, all trying to convince me to come back. At first, they were being nice about it, telling me that dad misses me and that we should patch things up, but when I didn't respond right away, the tone started to change. Some of them started guilt-tripping me, saying things like, "Your dad's under a lot of stress, and family is more important than a stupid room." I even had one of my aunts tell me that I was being selfish for taking my mom's side and that I needed to move on since she was gone now. It's been overwhelming, to say the least. But here's the kicker: while all this was going on, Uncle James told me that dad had been trying to reach out to him too. Apparently, dad called him and tried to act like everything was fine, asking if I was doing okay and if Uncle James could convince me to come back home. James said it was the most awkward conversation he'd ever had. Dad was trying to play the concerned parent, but Uncle James wasn't buying it. He knows how dad has treated me, and he made it clear to dad that I was welcome to stay with him for as long as I needed. It's pretty clear that my dad's side of the family is all on his team. They're trying to wear me down, and I have a feeling it's not just about wanting me back for family reasons, it's about control, just like with the house. I've been thinking a lot about whether Dad knows about the trust or if he's just focused on the house for now. Part of me wonders if the trust would complicate things even more if he found out. Right now, he's trying to guilt me into coming back, but if he knew about the extra money Mom left me, would that change his tactics? Would he suddenly try to get involved in managing that too? I have no idea, but the thought is nagging at me. Anyway, my lawyer has advised me to keep things quiet for now, especially since Dad is already so fixated on the house. Legally, he can't force me to move back, and he definitely can't sell the house without my agreement, but I can't help but feel like this whole thing is going to get messier before it gets better. Uncle James has been a rock through all of this, and I'm so grateful to have him in my corner. I don't know what I would have done without him, especially with how manipulative my dad and his side of the family have been. For now, I'm taking things day by day. I'm focusing on school, trying to keep up with my assignments, and just taking a breather from all the drama. Update 2. Every time I think this whole situation has reached its peak of awfulness, something worse happens or I learn something that just turns my world upside down even more. I thought things couldn't get any worse after leaving my dad's house, dealing with the family's non-stop messages, and then finding out about the trust fund my mom had set up for me. But I was wrong. Something happened yesterday that really hit me hard and changed the way I look at everything that's been going on. One of my cousins from my dad's side, let's call her Sarah, asked to meet up for coffee. I wasn't sure what to expect since most of my dad's side has been pressuring me to go back home, but Sarah and I have always been pretty close. She's a bit older than me, and we used to hang out a lot when we were younger, so I figured maybe she just wanted to check in and see how I was doing. When we met up, things were a bit awkward at first. Sarah's mommy aunt has been one of the main people pressuring me to reconcile with my dad, so I wasn't sure where this conversation was going to go. But then, out of nowhere, the conversation took a completely unexpected turn, and Sarah dropped a bomb on me that I wasn't prepared for. She hesitated at first, saying she wasn't sure if she should tell me what she knew, especially since her mom had told her to keep quiet about it. But she couldn't hold it in anymore. She felt I needed to know the truth. Sarah told me that my dad had been cheating on my mom for a long time, even before my mom got sick. I was completely floored. I had no idea this was going on. Sarah said she had known for a while but didn't want to get involved, mostly because her mom had told her not to. She explained that one day, before my mom passed away, she saw my dad out at a restaurant with Jane. And it wasn't just some casual lunch. Sarah said they looked like a couple. They were sitting close together, talking, and it was clear there was something going on between them. At the time, Sarah didn't think too much about it. Maybe she didn't want to believe the worst, or maybe she didn't want to create drama. But now, looking back, it all started to make sense to her. The part that hit me the hardest was when Sarah told me she eventually gathered the courage to tell my mom about what she had seen. I can't even begin to imagine how devastating that must have been for my mom. She was already going through so much with her illness, and on top of that, she had to deal with the knowledge that my dad had emotionally, and maybe even physically, moved on before she was gone. Sarah said that after she told my mom, she felt guilty, like maybe she had made things worse, but at the time, she thought it was the right thing to do. She believed my mom had the right to know, even if it caused her pain. Ever since then, though, it's been weighing on Sarah's conscience, and she's struggled with whether or not telling my mom was the right decision. When Sarah told me all this, everything started to click into place. I think this might be why my mom made the decisions she did in her will. She probably knew about Dad and Jane, and maybe she didn't trust him anymore. Maybe that's why she left her share of the house to me instead of leaving everything to Dad. It was her way of protecting me and making sure that if Dad tried to move on too quickly with Jane, I wouldn't be left with nothing. It hurts to think that my mom was dealing with so much behind the scenes. She must have known that her time was limited, and on top of everything, she had to worry about Dad betraying her trust. I feel like I should have known, but I guess I was too focused on trying to cope with losing her to see the signs. Now, all these little things are starting to make sense. The way my mom would sometimes look at my dad with this sadness in her eyes, the way she seemed so focused on making sure everything was in order before she passed away. I think she knew that she had to take care of me because she couldn't count on Dad to do it. After Sarah told me all this, I felt sick to my stomach. It was like my whole perspective on my parents' relationship had been flipped upside down. I always thought they had a strong marriage, and I never would have guessed that Dad was capable of something like this. I don't even know how to feel about him anymore. Part of me is furious that he could betray my mom like that, and part of me is just devastated that my mom had to carry that secret with her while she was sick. Now, I'm starting to wonder how much Jane knew about all of this. Did she know my mom was still in the picture when she got involved with my dad? Was she just waiting for my mom to pass away so she could move in and take over? It makes me feel even more certain that I made the right decision by leaving the house. I don't want to be around people who treated my mom like that, especially not in the home that she worked so hard to create for us. Since learning this, I've felt even more conflicted about what to do next. I still own half of the house, but I don't know if I ever want to set foot in it again. How can I live there, knowing all of this? How can I even look at my dad after finding out what he did to my mom? And now, it makes sense why Jane was so eager to push me out of the house. She probably saw me as an obstacle to fully taking over the life she wanted with my dad. Uncle James has been incredibly supportive through all of this. When I told him what Sarah said, he wasn't surprised. He said he always had a feeling that something was off with Dad after my mom got sick, but he never had proof. He's been encouraging me to take my time with making any decisions about the house, and he's even offered to help me talk to a lawyer if I want to take any legal steps. I'm not sure what I want to do yet, but knowing I have people like Uncle James and Sarah in my corner makes me feel a little less alone in all of this. For now, I'm trying to process everything and figure out what my next move should be. I don't think I can forgive my dad, at least not anytime soon. He's been pretending to be the victim in all of this, acting like I'm the one tearing the family apart, but now I see that he's been hiding so much from me. Update 3, hi guys, I guess this might be my final update. So, after everything that's happened, I decided I needed to have a final conversation with my dad. This wasn't because I wanted to fix anything or make things better between us, but I felt like I needed to say my piece and make it clear that I didn't want any part of the life he and Jane were building. It wasn't easy to make that decision, but after finding out about the affair and realizing how much my mom had been through, I knew I couldn't just stay silent and walk away without closure. I messaged my dad, telling him I wanted to meet and talk. He was quick to respond, clearly thinking this was my way of coming back and reconciling. He and Jane had probably convinced themselves that I just needed time to cool off and that I'd eventually come around. When I showed up at the house without any bags or signs that I was moving back in, I could see the surprise on both of their faces. They were expecting me to be ready to move back in, but that wasn't happening. I sat down with them in the living room, and the atmosphere was tense. Dad tried to start with some small talk, asking how I was doing and if I was ready to move forward. Jane just sat there, kind of fake smiling, clearly uncomfortable but still trying to act like everything was normal. It took everything in me to stay calm and not let my anger take over, but I had made up my mind I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. I told Dad straight up that I knew about the affair, that I knew he had been with Jane while Mom was still alive, and that someone had confirmed that for me. I didn't want to bring my cousin, Sarah, into this matter because her mom wouldn't have liked that at all. The look on his face was priceless. He was completely caught off guard, and for once, he had nothing to say. Jane went pale and tried to deny it, stammering something about how it wasn't what it seemed, but I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I had already heard enough from Sarah to know the truth. I explained that I wasn't there to argue or try to get an apology. I just wanted them to know that I wasn't coming back. I told them that I didn't trust them, that I didn't want any part of this life they had built on lies, and that I wasn't going to pretend like everything was fine. The house, half of it, at least, was mine now, and I wasn't going to let them push me out, but I also wasn't going to live there. I told them I'd figure out what to do with my share later, but for now, I didn't want any contact with them. The one thing that was clear was that no decision regarding the house should be made without me. Of course, Dad tried to play the victim, saying that I was tearing the family apart, that I was overreacting, and that I needed to think about the future. He even tried to guilt me by saying how hard it had been for him after Mom died, that he needed someone to lean on, and that's why Jane came into the picture. But I wasn't buying it. He made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I wasn't going to feel bad for him when he had clearly disrespected my mom long before she passed away. As for Jane, she just sat there quietly after I called them out. It was clear that she wasn't going to take any responsibility for what had happened, and I didn't expect her to. Honestly, I don't care what happens between the two of them at this point. They've made their bed, and they can lie in it together. After I said my piece, I got up to leave. I could tell Dad was still in shock. He probably thought I'd come crawling back, but that was never going to happen. I walked out of the house feeling lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to finally have some closure, to say what needed to be said, and to let them know that I wasn't going to be part of their lives anymore. Since then, I've blocked them both on social media and stopped responding to any messages from my dad's side of the family. It's been quiet for the most part, although I've heard from Sarah that Dad's been telling people I'm the one who's acting out and being unreasonable. But honestly, I don't care. People will believe what they want, and I'm done trying to explain myself to anyone. As for the house, I haven't made any final decisions yet. My lawyer and Uncle James are helping me figure out the best way to handle it, but I've been thinking about either selling my share or renting it out. I don't want to be tied to that house anymore, but I also don't want to give Dad and Jane any easy wins. If they want to stay there, they'll have to deal with the fact that I still have control over part of it, and I'm not going to let them make any big changes without my approval. In the end, I think this whole situation was a wake-up call for me. I've learned that sometimes the people you trust the most can let you down in ways you never expected. But I've also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I've made it through this mess with my head held high, and I'm ready to move forward on my own terms. As for Dad and Jane, well, I guess they got what they wanted. But in the end, they've lost something to me. And maybe, in time, they'll realize that some things can't be undone. Karma has a way of catching up with people, and while I'm done with them, I can't help but feel like they'll eventually have to face the consequences of their actions. For now, I'm focusing on myself, my future, and the people who have truly been there for me through all of this. I'm not looking back. I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for your support, advice, and kind words throughout this whole ordeal. Reading your stories and knowing that I'm not alone in this has meant more to me than I can express. Your encouragement has helped me stay strong and stand my ground, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Thanks for being there when I needed it most.